nature of our panelists' commitments, we're going to mix and match. So in fact, our first panelist is Patricia Martin. Many of you might know Patricia. She's certainly key to the whole early childhood development policy. In the document that our policy was brought through, Patricia was a key architect of the policy. But she has other roles as well. And so I'll read about her formal affiliations as described here. And just one second, lost my page. Where did the problem is? Okay, so just to capture Patricia, she's director of Advocacy Aid. The context she's here this morning is that she's the lead in the early development working group, the South African SACSoWACH, which we know is the South African Society for Women, Adolescents, and Children's Health. Patricia, we're going to hear about your experience in childhood development and some of the advocacy lessons we learned from that. Thank you.
Okay, good morning everybody. Marije, thank you for that introduction. In some ways, I think I probably fit better in this first group this morning anyway, so that works out quite well. Because the advocacy case that we are trying to make is not small. We are looking at building early childhood development systems, strengthening those within the health system. So I'm going to share with you the experience of the SACSoWACH Early Development Working Group's experience in working collaboratively to advocate for systematizing early childhood development in the health system as understood in terms of the ECD policy. Okay, so in terms of the Early Development Working Group, who are we? The Early Development Working Group is a subgroup within SACSoWACH, and SACSoWACH is, as I mentioned, the South African Civil Society Coalition for Women and Children's Health, and we engage in a coordinated advocacy platform to strengthen health systems and outcomes for women, children, and adolescents. Within SACSoWACH, there is an early development working group which is made up of a range of organizations. We have 8 permanent members, but we are a much bigger group. We have a lot of co-opted members who come in and out as we need, as the need arises. And our membership really is multi-sectoral. We have representatives from the formal clinical health sector, but also from the disability sector, the development sector, and early childhood care and education. And it comes across academic representation, advocacy organizations, clinicians, practitioners, and many more. Well, what is it that we do as the Early Development Working Group? We focus on ensuring that the health sector fulfills its ECD responsibilities as prescribed by the Early Childhood Development Policy. So there's a very close intersect between what we do and the theme of the conference, because what we're talking about is very much captured in what the health sector knows as a survive, thrive, and transform agenda, and which has been most recently captured and more concretized in the global nurturing care framework. We really are concerned with that last piece of the title of this conference, which says transform. And you can read the get real in 2 ways. It's either get real, or as we like to say, it's time to get real. Okay? So what we mean by getting real in terms of early childhood development in the health sector is that what we see when we look at the early childhood development policy and the responsibilities that are placed on the health sector, there's a very extensive set of responsibilities that are placed in the domain of the health sector, some of which the health sector already has on board, but there's very significant components which are new, innovative pieces that come to the health system. And what that means is that what the health system has to do is we need to build and strengthen the health system components to support those responsibilities to ensure universal provision of early development services. So how do we do the advocacy? Well, the Early Development advance its goals at multiple levels using a range of strategies. So collaboration is key. Early childhood development, as you all know, is a multi-sectoral piece. And not one sector can drive any successful advocacy initiative around that. So our underlying premise is that we bring our collective minds from the different sectors, our strengths and our resources to bear on a shared problem. We then work in partnership, side by side in the health system, through communication, research and other methods. So what is the major challenge that we face as the early development working group? The early childhood development policy is very clear in terms of the health sector's responsibilities. There's a very strong health and nutrition component, which is a long-standing responsibility within the health sector, as well as clinical care for pregnant women, new mothers and infants. But there is a new set of responsibilities that come on board which have been more traditionally located, very poorly I must say, within the social services sector, and that is the early cognitive and stimulation component, as well as the parenting support. And what we see when we look at those responsibilities, looked at in the context of the health system, is that we have over the years developed much stronger survival systems. I know there's a lot of doom and gloom in the last 2 days about the strength of our systems, but compared to where we were 10 or 15 years ago, our survival systems have improved substantially. However, when we look at our development systems, the previous presentation speaks to it critically. When it comes to developmental delays, disabilities, parenting support, cognitive development, we look at the health system and there are simply either no systems or extremely weak systems. So when it came to advocacy around the health sector taking on board its early childhood development responsibilities, in many ways we had to start building the health system for development from scratch. And that meant that we really had to start from scratch. I remember in my previous life as working with an organisation called Access, a coalition on social security, picking up the ECD, and we found the health sector, communicated with the health sector, we were setting up a national consultative forum around social security needs in the early childhood development context. And the comment from the health sector at that point was, we don't do ECD. And you know, that was a very polarized position that we had. That was some 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. It has shifted substantially, but the residue of that position remains. So critically, ECD has to get onto the health sector agenda into its policies and laws. We need to see very effective leadership and coordination around ECD. It is multi-sectoral. It needs coordination within the health sector as well as across the health sector and other sectors. There has to be a platform of services provided. What do we mean when we say the health service or the health sector has to provide ECD services? We need to be very clear about what we mean. We have to have qualified human resources to provide the services, and critically, without money, we can never get serious. We need the financial resources. And in a similar vein, we need to start seeing some kind of formal mechanism for monitoring and evaluating our progress in taking on those responsibilities, also the impact that our health system is making on development outcomes. So how far are we, and how far do we have to go? Well, I will say that, as I said, this is not a small, localized advocacy example. This is a major systemic initiative that we're looking at here. So we have a very long way to go. But we have managed and we've approached our advocacy in a very systematic framework. We've started working across those elements of the system. We've managed to develop leadership in civil society and the health sector and coordination across the two. And this is now to be through the Early Development Working Group, and then with the Department of Health, established a joint Department of Health and SACSoWACH run to help with the technical working group. The Department of Health's Maternal, Child and School Health Directive has taken very strong leadership on this issue, and particularly in the context of the the Road to Health booklet, where we worked very collaboratively. And that Road to Health booklet is now the platform for the delivery of ECT services as contemplated by the ECT policy. And it is aligned to the 5 pillars of the nurturing care framework, which alliances and private health support. And together, as this collaborative initiative, we are working together to build a system supporting pillars 2 and 5, which are the new development pillars. And what we are doing is we are in the process of defining that package of services and moving down to the second level of the system, focusing on screening and referrals for developmental delays and disabilities and parenting support for early development through the health system. Once we have that service package in place, we can then start developing or strengthening the other systems components to support delivery aligned to the package. But we can't do this without defining the package first. We have to define the package to know what human resources capacity we need to deliver the package. We know to know what human and financial resources and infrastructure we need. And it's once we've defined that package that the hard work starts, and that's the advocacy to get a shift in resource allocation to make this happen on the ground. And that's our big challenge. Moving forward, we will have to work together. Sorry, I think I might have missed a slide. Sorry, I've got 2 more slides, so if you'll allow me to finish. So what has helped and what has hindered? So what has helped our system, because I think this has been a very successful integrated model of advocacy, is that the global context has been right as a supportive context and environment. We're talking about the nurturing care environment, the global nurturing care framework, and then critically the growing recognition of ECP as a development issue. Rights-based arguments are limited in their ability to shift resources. The fact that it's now from the development of aid, part of the SDGs, the group of 20, all recognize ECP 20, Treasury is now willing to listen to a better extent. We have a wealth of knowledge and expertise in the country, and there's a huge willingness on the part of all the role players to bring that knowledge to the table to start shifting our system. The willingness within the Department of Health, Maternal and Child Health Directorate to take us on and really with very limited resources start making changes has been immense of that and the developmental progress we have. And within health there has been a willingness to embrace ECD responsibilities and recognize that it needs collaborative development. So therefore we've got the joint working group. And critically the recognition that what we're talking about is a system strengthening initiative. Would you like me to stop now? I haven't finished the slide. And that we need to collaborate in doing this. What has hindered this is that ECD has not and continues not to be a no-brainer for the full spectrum of health system role players. And that's not just within government. We have to advocate for early development to be recognized as a platform within the civil society coalition for children that are a very clinical focus before. We have a strong recognition of ECT as a health priority with our working partners in health. But the question for us is, does the rest of the public governance system and the health system see the value in ECT? And unfortunately, we've not seen those shifts. We've not seen any shifts in resources since the adoption of ECT policy around developing services through the health system. The only significant shift we've seen in budgets is for early center infrastructure development and social development. And the ECT policy was adopted in 2015, so we're moving on to 3 or 4 years later. And even the Minister of Health, when he speaks in the context of development and looked at some of the literature, looked at some of these public statements and speeches, when he talks about development in screening, for example, doesn't talk about development. He talks about the school health program and cites numbers there. The development discourse is missing, the platform is missing from the health system. So moving forward, we have to work together better as a sector, not just a few of us, and engage in strong evidence-based advocacy as the early development sector in health, to make sure that the rest of the health sector and public governors are convinced that ECD is of the utmost importance and needs resources. Thank you.
I think the point you've highlighted is that there has been a significant shift in the Department of Health approach to ECD. When we were developing the policy, it was actually quite hard to get the department involved. But now the department is fully vested. That just outlined to us what was the journey, what has happened in the 3 years between initial kind of not seeing relevance to now some intense relevance. What allowed it to happen and what was the role of the organization?
Advocacy, engagement, sharing of evidence and conversations. It helped that we could have these conversations in the context of a global agenda. Because the platform is there and the country needs to start reporting not just on infant mortality rates. So there were a range of factors that came together, but it was a persistent knocking at the door with relevant information and the offer to bring the collective minds together to find solutions that are feasible and affordable. So at this stage it has been about communication and building relationships and networks.
We'll take further questions as the discussion goes on. So we're moving on. So we've been introduced to the working group with the belongs to this umbrella body called SACSoWACH. And I think we can be quite proud that in this child health arena we have this broad umbrella civil society organization that's together now taking the road forward. So it's a pleasure now to introduce us as
Stasha Jordan.
Okay, Stasha Jordan, who is the deputy of SACSoWACH. And she's now going to take it further, telling us a little bit more about the organization and some of the advocacy efforts and some of the many successes that the organization has. So thanks.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Just to give you a little bit of background, I am the co-chair of the South African Civil Society for Women, Adolescents and Children's Health, certainly more than a mouthful. We call ourselves for short the Coalition. We are a fairly new civil society organization. We were formed in 2015 under the auspices of the Department of Health in a bid to improve health access, particularly for these three groups, women, adolescents and children. Our patron is Dr. Tseko Motsepe, and our chairs are the Save the Children South Africa, Sue Jones, Prof, and the South African Breast Milk Reserve, which is really where I come from. We are the human milk banking organization, and over the last 15 years we've worked with many of you in a bid to improve the uptake of breastfeeding in the neonatal intensive care units, which is really the area of advocacy that I have been most active in, which has been breastfeeding promotion at the hospital level. And obviously now breastfeeding promotion at large, because you can imagine that to acquire the native breast milk, you must encourage women to breastfeed. So today I'm so glad that Patricia was ahead of me, because the early childhood development policy environment is rather complex. But just to give you an idea, this is our membership. We have 29 members at the moment, 29 civil society organizations that are dedicated to delivering a variety of health services, ranging from sexual and reproductive health, nutrition, early childhood development, and how is the coalition structured and how do we work? Because we actually, there is chaos, there is madness and there is chaos, but there is also some logic in all this chaos. We have divided the coalition into 3 working groups. We call them technical working groups. We have the technical working group for nutrition, which used to be originally the breastfeeding technical working group, the childhood development technical working group, and the sexual and reproductive health technical working group. And the organizations split into these efforts. I haven't, my presentation will end on this slide. I will talk a little bit about what have been our successes with regards to advocacy over the last 3 years. And I'm going to start with the group for nutrition, breastfeeding. We have been very active in breastfeeding advocacy and the promotion of breastfeeding, and we work in close partnership with the Department of Health on the breastfeeding plan, which is a really involved set of activities that the Department of Health is proposed to engage to promote breastfeeding countrywide. Have we been successful? Yes, we have been successful. Breastfeeding rates have grown 5-fold, as opposed to where we were 10 years ago. However, this is still limited to a pace of life. And to this end, the Technical Working Group for Nutrition has engaged policymakers on the level of running roundtables for breastfeeding, where on an annual basis we invite various constituencies and stakeholders to join us to discuss improving breastfeeding, and we have focused specifically on breastfeeding in the workplace and on stimulating support for breastfeeding in the workplace, support for the change in legislation around maternity to in fact promote paid maternity leave for up to 6 months, and how would we do that. And we actually held the most recent event last week that was very well attended. We had representatives from the Department of Labour, from the social development. We had a number of the Department of Health, and what we discussed was essentially how could we improve breastfeeding for women in the workplace. Are we willing, or are we still just setting the course for policy? In my opinion, in the context of getting real, we really need to translate our policy objectives on an implementation level. And perhaps we are still in the early stages of these ambitious endeavors. A lot of what we want to do is still sitting in the boardrooms and in policy documents, instead of necessarily translating into grassroots endeavors. However, we really need to set the course first and foremost, and once we have set the course, there is a role for a strong implementation strategy of our objectives. And the question is health messaging really filtering to the health system, to the public? That is a big question. When we walk in the hospitals and we discuss breastfeeding with women, we see that there are a lot of mothers know the theory, very few practice the theory. There are many key indicators for why that happens, such as obviously what are the obstacles to breastfeeding, returning to work, for instance, having to play an economic role in the household. Those are some of the challenges that our advocacy efforts are facing currently. What should we be doing? Well, that is always a very good question to answer. I think we're doing what we're supposed to be doing at large. We're asking ourselves difficult questions. We are setting policy objectives, and we are engaging policymakers to create an enabling environment for budgets to be allocated to our efforts. It all starts at the policy level, engaging with the decision makers to decide how money will be spent. What role and responsibilities can ordinary childhood practitioners play in this? First and foremost, I don't think childhood healthcare practitioner in any way ordinary. I think you're all extraordinary people doing extraordinary work, often in a really difficult environment. I believe that we should practice what we preach, particularly I think in the context of breastfeeding and breastfeeding advocacy. It is not enough to talk about it, it is really about doing it. Getting a woman to lactate and breastfeed, that is really what it's all about. And actually inspiring our constituencies to come on board and be part of this transformation that is much needed if we will in fact achieve our very, very ambitious objectives of reducing undefined mortality, which we know it's plateauing at neonatal mortality rates, which are really directly linked with breastfeeding and early initiation of lactation, and obviously continued breastfeeding thereafter. How best can a commitment be catalyzed, and how do we involve policymakers? Well, that is a $1 million question. I think it is all about commitment and ongoing commitment to the advocacy process, engaging the decision makers in ongoing communication, but primarily setting the course not only for policy
advocacy efforts in the country?
Well, we definitely bring together stakeholders on a regular basis. We engage with policymakers in a bid to, in fact, define the course that will then create resources to implement our healthcare efforts. So one has to look at it from the point of view of the process, probably a lengthy process towards change. But we certainly bring together a variety of stakeholders, both in civil society and in the public sector.
The second question is, what's the relevance to most of us? So we work at clinics, we work at hospitals, we work in districts. How do we engage with this coalition? What value do you offer ordinary health professionals or other professionals working in the field?
Well, I think the question is really to the public, what do you want to achieve? I mean, well, why are we here? I mean, this is not only a question about why are we here, the question is why are you here? What do you want to change? And how do you want to engage with us? What is the change that you want to see? I mean, that is really
we've had 2 days of listening to all the things we want. How can you help us achieve what we want?
Well, I think, if you ask me this question, considering the very wide topics that we've covered, I mean, I obviously can't answer it in a quick question, a quick Q&A as we do right now. But I would say engage us. You can look us up online, SACSoWACH.org. Drop us an email, see how you can participate and what topic areas you fit in that you would like to support us in. And let me tell you one thing, we need support, because you'll find that when push comes to shove, as I say, everybody's good at talking, very few people are good at doing. And we all know, I think from what we have discussed, we all know what the things that we must practice are to improve outcomes. In the clinical context of nutrition, practice breastfeeding. That is how you can change the landscape of our health system.
Thanks, Sasha. I'm sure there will be more questions when we go to the discussion. Alright, so we're moving right on. So our next presenter is Marije. Marije, first, I always have problems with Marije's double levels. Versteeg-Mojanaga. And I know Marije very well, I can always struggle with this thing. Marije is the director of the Rural Health Advocacy Project. You may or may not have heard of the project, but the truth is they're one of the most vocal advocates of the rights of citizens, not only in rural health, and all the issues that affect us, even many of the issues they take up in rural are just as relevant in the urban setting. So they've been a vocal voice, and they serve us, including the children, because most children in this country still live in rural areas. So we want some perspectives of Marije on their work, and perhaps some of their successes and failures, but perhaps what lessons we can learn from their efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Haroon. I want to start by apologizing for not having a chance to attend the first 2 days. There was always have 25-year celebration that we had to honor one of our major donors that have funded much of our work, that of other social justice organizations in the country, and we just had to be there. But I have been having some discussions with Jenny to hear what were the issues emerging in the past 2 days. I'm going to talk a bit about our lessons learned and our successes, but I'm also going to reflect quite broadly on where we are standing with advocacy for rural health and health and child health in general. The 3 main points that I will be making is that I believe we are failing to get the basics right, and that there is really no excuse for this. And when I say we, I mean with the resources available in the country and the law, the legal framework, I believe we are failing to getting the basics right. And also I believe that the austerity measures that are being implemented currently in the country are hitting the most vulnerable disproportionately and deeply vulnerable groups are the worst hit. And really, again, there's no excuse for this. And lastly, we can make as many recommendations as we like. I don't want to sound cynical. I think we need good recommendations, good policy recommendations. But if those recommendations are not supported by a broad-based and loud child health advocacy movement, we will not see the change that children are deserving and are legally entitled to. And this movement cannot be disease-specific. Again, it must be about getting the basics right: health promotion, prevention, mass scale rollout of community health workers, and so on. I think that's where we need to start. So all countries face the challenge of priority setting due to scarcity of resources. Not only South Africa in rationing healthcare, it's a feature of healthcare resource allocation. Even the most affluent welfare societies are rationing healthcare, are setting priorities. But it's generally accepted that people have a right to health. I know the private sector might disagree, but generally I think United Nations, our government, civil society, we believe people have a right to health, which is enshrined in our constitution, and it places a duty on the state to progressively realize these rights, taking reasonable measures within available resources. So due to the conditions of scarcity, the other developmental needs in education and many other important areas, we do need to set priorities for healthcare. And South Africa, in line with the international covenants and treaties, has rightfully identified children as a priority group for multiple reasons. As you know, I'm not the expert in child health, you are, but as you know, firstly, this is, from a life cycle perspective, it's only fair that all children are given an equal chance from birth to fulfill their potential. And children are fully dependent on adults and on the state. We really cannot ask children to look after their own health. They depend on us. And we know from the first 1,000 days evidence that there are significant missed opportunities with permanent lifelong consequences if we're not getting those first 1,000 days right. Secondly, South Africa, again in line with international guidelines, has prioritized primary health care as the rational and rightful place to prioritize our scarce resources. And so primary health care, as you know, provides the first entry to the system. It's a gateway for higher levels of care. If you don't get the primary health care entry right, how will children get to higher levels of care? It doesn't make sense to prioritize our funding higher up if we don't have primary health care for everyone as the entry level. It's cost effective, it promotes interventions for easily preventable, treatable conditions. So while Section 27 places the duty of progressive realization on healthcare, Section 28 of the Constitution promises children the immediate right to basic healthcare. Again, as you know, that right is not defined. What does basic healthcare entail? It's not defined so that we can very easily pinpoint where the right is not being met. But we can. We can see what are the major health programs that should be in place to meet that right. But let's say, for argument's sake, even if we settle on the most conservative definition of primary health care, which is not our lawful definition, not our preferred definition, but then we are still not meeting our obligations, and scores of children in South Africa are living below the level of adequate primary health care. We only have to look at the district health barometer. We see some improvements at the diarrhea ratio, malnutrition, and so on, but it's hugely inequitable between quintile 1 districts and the better off districts. And we also know that the quintile 1 districts are mostly rural districts. So the rural children are still the most worst off, performing the worst on very key child health programs. For instance, the national death rate has, caused by diarrhea has dropped, as the district health barometer says, to an all-time low. But in Ortongo district, the former homeland district, the diarrhea case fatality rate is triple the national average and has double the national targets. So that gives you an idea of the inequities within the system. You can go on about breastfeeding targets and how they're not being met in deep rural areas, malnutrition levels, and so on. So, from our experiences working in rural areas, we know the stopping moratoria are hard-hitting healthcare delivery in rural areas. We have done advocacy for that with Wiedaad and others on the ground, but I have not really seen the changes that I would like to see. We know that there are some facilities that are at the brink of falling below the very minimum level to provide a very minimum level of care. And those facilities are the only facilities in those areas. So there are no alternatives of care that we have in urban areas. We're really failing the most impoverished communities if we don't prioritize those understaffed deeply rural facilities. We know that healthcare for children with disabilities is deteriorating in rural areas. I call these children all victims of healthcare failures. Many of the kids, as you know, have developed disabilities as a result of healthcare failures. They are doubly disadvantaged for not getting the therapists post on the first to be cut when we freeze posts, let alone making the work of therapists more, facilitate the work of therapists by providing mid-level workers, transport to go into the household, into the community level. All of that is declining and worsening. We've got declining vaccination coverage in many of the rural areas as well, rising teenage pregnancy, yet a lack of contraceptives at the moment, and children dying of easily treatable childhood illnesses and diarrhea. I'm going to come around to what we're going to do about this.
So Marije,
Yeah.
I think this group has got a good idea of some of the issues. What I think what we really want to know is, what are some of the successes you've had? And perhaps share with us what allowed them, what have you found about the rural activities? Let me make this a great interview. I don't want to talk the time against us. What have you really found that you've achieved?
So I was going to come there because that's the problem, Haroon. I'm proud of the many policy gains that we have achieved. You know, we have advocated for a rural chapter of resources for health. We had all of these issues around decentralized platforms, prioritizing HR posts in rural areas, community health worker policy that is rural friendly. We had that game. The white paper mentioned the rural population as a priority group. We had that game. Policies are not being implemented. Policy gains are being reversed. The NHI bill as it stands now, the rural reference is gone. It's no longer there. So we worked hard to get it in there. Next version is gone. So that's why I was kind of building up to this case to say, I'm glad that the policy advocacy gains that we made, we've also been able to make changes at a very localized level. And healthcare workers were struggling with staffing shortages. We were able to connect, work with partners, to advocate for staffing to those individual facilities. We have made those gains, and of course that has benefited children. But my main point is about...
That's of interest. We're all struggling with the fact that there's a human resource crisis. All of us. We don't get enough. But you've successfully managed to do that in a few particularly rural settings. Let's share that experience. How did that happen?
So for that to happen, it takes courageous healthcare workers to come out of a difficult, often difficult context of working very hard with limited resources and seeing the impact on patients, to come out of that space and report externally to organizations like the World Advocacy Project, like Section 27, to say what is the disaster that you are either facing or are about to face, and having that trust in us as organizations that we will help you in advocating for staffing, advocating for staff allocations. But again, we have had those successes, and I'm proud of those. But my main point that I wanted to make as a main message to the audience today is that we need a child health advocacy movement. As a civil society, we are too divided. This one is focusing on mental health, we're focusing on HIV, we're focusing on rurality. We need, and children are cross-cutting as well, but we need a concerted, focused voice for basic healthcare for children. And that's why I was referring to getting the basics right. And because more policy advocacy, it's good, but it doesn't get implemented and it gets reversed unless there's this broad-based healthcare workers, parents, civil society on the street demanding the right for children. And unless that is happening, I remain.
So that's going to be part of our discussion. Is that what's the mechanism? Like we have a rural health advocacy project, we now develop a child health advocacy project. Is that what you're doing? What may be a mechanism to allow this movement? What's your sense of what the solution is? How we do this?
Yeah, I do think we need to come together and be very bold. You've done it, not all of the audience knows, but you know what you achieved with Saving Mothers, Saving Babies campaign during the 89 so that really took a treatment action campaign, the lawyers, the patients themselves, the healthcare users, communities. It took more than statements, policy work, it took people to go to the street.
Okay, so I know I've cut you off a little bit from what but you have more chance in discussion where, as I said, the people, this is let's get real. We desperately need to know ways of how we as individuals together can make it work.
My final comment would be to say healthcare workers must continue with the local advocacy that they are doing. It's really important. We're not saying that it's, not part of the solution, but we also must come together with that.
Thank you very much. very much for this. As a child health advocate over the years, he's been a very strong child health advocate. I love having David at the meeting because he often asks the difficult questions. He has very little respect for who you authority, not in a disrespectful way, but you ask the question wherever it is. And I think that helps the conference particularly. So, David, people might also know, he's the global chair of the People's Health Movement, and I think all of us should be aware of that movement because they've been moving the advocacy agenda at the global and the local level. So, David's got a vast range of experience, and my challenge is going to be to make sure that I can keep David to 10 minutes, because I'm sure there's quite a lot to tell us. So David, that's going to be your challenge. Julia's very strict here when she picks up her. Thank you very much. And David actually was ill. He phoned me 2 days ago saying he had a temperature of 39.5, but I Saloojee because he actually made the effort to come back the next day. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Haroon. And I have to say, you know, we were at the very first conference in Durban, and I've been to most of them. This one is definitely the best. Congratulations. Getting much more focused. Okay, so I've got, as usual, far too much to present. So I'm going to skim through these, and I'm actually going to present as Marije did, mainly the problems, because I'm hoping that in the discussion we can toss around what might be some of the solution. So, I've got these key focus areas. These are the focus areas, and I'm going to try and substantiate them. Improved coverage, especially at community and primary level. More priority to nutrition and food systems. Much more focus on social determinants. Talked yesterday about reorientating health professions education and urgently conjunctural issue in HR. And finally, become active in a social movement, and I'll try and say why that's necessary. I'm going to go through these all very quickly. Okay, we're a bad performer. Life expectancy on the vertical axis, GDP per capita on the horizontal. You can see, though there's an improvement after ART, we still perform well below where we should be. Of course, that's due to all sorts of things, not least that the per capita GDP is very unequally distributed. So actually, most people in the country are down there somewhere. We saw this yesterday, flattening off. And although we're saying we're doing well, actually, I don't think, even if you believe the latest figures, 34 per thousand and a 5 mortality rate, not good. We should be doing much better. And we made a big impact with, and are making an impact with ART, but the other big killers, especially newborn, but I would say pneumonia and diarrhea still remain the big challenge. They're not insurmountable problems. You aren't doing well. And it's likely that a very significant number of deaths of infants are unreported. Why do I say that? People have seen this from the Children's Institute. So these are mortuary figures from Salt River and Phoenix. So they're draining, presumably, the Cape and Durban metro. And even there are unexplained deaths outside healthcare facilities. And Mark's not here today, but they're not all infants. They aren't all tiny babies. So this is happening in these metros. It can be very short. People whose 3-week-old baby die in the middle of our Tambo district on the Why would they bother going forward. So, some high burden countries have achieved MDG 4. I've listed them there, and in red are 2 countries which we may compare ourselves with, because most people say, oh, well, those countries are all much poorer. So I've put in Brazil and Peru. So what's common to those countries? One thing that's common is increased access to care through community-based delivery. Malawi is such a country. So just look at some comparison. Malawi does better with exclusive breastfeeding, with measles coverage, and where we don't have data, we think with postnatal care as well. Much poorer country. So how do they do this? Through CHWs. The CHWs, this slide shows, perform better than health facility workers. Dark blue, community health workers. Light blue, health facility workers. Of course, they have to be properly trained, properly supervised, properly supported. But there's lots of evidence. The density of community health workers is necessary for impact. What do I mean by density? I mean, how many CHWs per population? Brazil, Rwanda, very high density. And Rwanda has as many web and with 1/5 of the population. And there's lots of evidence that the ratio of CHWs to population has a big impact. This just shows on underweight. Not saying it's a direct impact, there's a strong association. So what's happened in Rwanda? This has been the decline. They're still worse than us, but not much worse in terms of child mortality. So in all of these countries, ICCM has allowed integrated community care. So we talked about IMCI yesterday, but we didn't talk about community care. And that's lacking in South Africa. Are we too developed to do it? Is it because there are no kids who are dying outside facilities? Is it because we've got coverage of everyone through our clinic system? No, it's obvious. So, scale up, 28 out of 42 countries that implement in Africa have implemented ICCM. And you heard Tony Costello, I didn't get to talk, but I'm sure you talked about women's groups. Sympathy groups. I didn't get him. Okay, so his work has shown that merely getting community-based facilitators to organize women's groups to meet regularly, talk about their problems, develop strategies, has had a big impact on newborn and maternal mortality. And there's several published trials on this. But we don't have that facility, because we don't have enough people on the ground. If they're on the ground, they're under different sectors and they're not working together. So there's powerful evidence. So we wrote an article about this in the SACSoWACH. And I don't believe our current CHW program will result in the desired reductions. We don't extend its scope to include cognitive function, and we don't increase the ratio substantially. We have had a victory. The minimum wage, it's a victory. But that's not enough. We need now to plant one in the nursing council to allow the scope of practice to be increased. CHW. So, nutrition. We're doing very badly. All evidence shows that our stunting rates remain high, over 25%. Our underweight rates are going down, but that's because these stunted children are getting fat. We know that lots of kids are hungry. We know that, especially in the poverty-stricken households. And we know that the richest 10% have got wealthier in the country. So, I'm saying that child health practitioners a duty to do this, to talk about equal pay. So there's too much on this slide for me to cover. I think there are 3 minutes left. So this just depicts, and you've got a very fast watch. This just shows the multi-level causation of the problem. But if you look right down to the bottom, the real problems that we're neglecting as a child health community are the structural factors. What's driving this? And it's basically neoliberal policy. I hope we can take this on in the panel. And this is global. This isn't just here. So there's lots of evidence in the countries that perform well that around half of the reduction in child mortality comes from other sectors than health. So this is some quantitative work done. You can read this article very good. And Brazil showed this mainly by other interventions that reduced stunting and in all quintiles. So how did they do it? Through a whole range of interventions, of which healthcare is just one. Sanitation, water supply, electrification. You just have to look at their stats to see how much progress they made. Our fear is going to be rather bad. I'm not going to spend much on this, but we know that we've got this problem, which was discussed yesterday, increasing obesity amongst kids, and we're already here. So, we know that diets are poor, lots of sugar, lots of fat, but, and this wasn't talked about, Avida gave a great talk on sugary beverages. It's not just sugary beverages, it's ultra-processed products. So you may not be able to see these figures, but in a 5-year period, the change of sales of ready meals, snack bars, noodles, went up over 40%. And we've got a big study now done in Paediatrician and Austria that's showing exactly this. So people aren't buying this stuff because they don't like fresh fish, fresh meat, dairy products, because they're hard. And so we have to advocate around it. Our package market size increased hugely. The TNCs are targeting us. These are the TNCs in nutrition. And this ought to be something that child health practitioners know. But nowadays, the 63 out of 100 largest economic entities are transnational corporations, not government. So this is why I'm not going to end now. I can get to the last slide. We have to change pediatric and child health education. We have to address the NHI, I won't spend time on that, except to say it's extremely worrying that suddenly we now see 5 possible financing streams in the NHI. And when we point this out to the minister, he denounces us, Mark, me, and others as being people who are trying to obstruct a policy process which is completely opaque. It's been changed, we don't know why and by who. So there are lots of publications on this. So finally, we need to advocate for improved access and coverage. We need to develop comprehensive approaches and teach about them to address social determinants. And we won't do this unless we organize independent civil society. And when I say independent, with apologies to SACSoWACH, that does not include private sector. Independent. Public interest civil society is what we need to build. And I'm putting up the slide of PHM. You should go to the website, and that's the South African PHM website. And we are a movement that tries to link local and I wouldn't say we had any major victory. I think what we managed to do is to raise awareness in different communities and with partners, because we work quite closely with the Human Rights Law Group, Section 27 TAG, and others, and we have been discussing about pitfalls of the NHI and trying to mobilize, including in a number of communities. We've had assemblies and so on, but we haven't got a victory. You know, we're trying to improve awareness and create a movement. Globally, we have had some success. We've influenced at WHO level some of the country delegations through an initiative we've got which is called WHO Watch, where young activists get brought to Geneva. We have policy workshop with them which lasts about a week, and then we analyze all of the resolutions going to the World Health Assembly, and we put out a digest of these to all member state delegations. Otherwise they have to go through pilot documents like this, and they don't do it because it interferes with shopping in Geneva and so on. So we give them a digest, and then we lobby certain delegations to bring up key issues. I can't say we won a lot of victories, but we won a few. And then, of course, we publish Global Health Watch, which is an alternative World Health report, and that gets used as a text now in many, many teaching programs as an alternative World Health report. So those are the kinds of things we do, but I can't point to something like TAC. Actually, we brought down the price of antiretrovirals.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Had various guises over the years, heavily involved in the THC campaigns in the early 2000s. Subsequently, efforts legal unit taking on lots of the important cases about constitutional rights, and most recently, Section 27, taking on many of the issues that are key to our democracy and constitution. So, as I said, I want to use Mark and all the Mark has been a good friend of this association. The last conference he came to, and when I said to him, I know I was in his work today, I knew Mark wasn't available. But within about 10 minutes, Mark wrote back and says, this is important, I'm going to be here. He's going off to Rhode Island, he's got a meeting there at 2 o'clock, he's flying, but he still made sure he came and spoke to us. So, Mark, we do appreciate your efforts and your friendship to this association. Thank you.
Technically illiterate, so I'm just wondering how do I press the data? Good morning, everybody. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to say a few words today. It's a privilege to come here. I wish I'd been able to be here for the last 2 days to learn properly from your presentations and from your experience, and to gain some inspiration from people that are able to prove that even in a very difficult environment, it's sometimes possible to have success. And if only we could go to scale with some of our small successes, then we would be able to better address and resolve issues of child health. I would imagine, and it's reinforced by what I've just heard by my colleagues now, that what I would have picked up over the last 2 days is that child health is not a pretty picture. This was just what I put together at 5 o'clock this morning, but as David said, there are issues of obesity, there's issues of perinatal morbidity and mortality, there's STIs, it goes on and on and on. And I pity the children, particularly the children from lower socioeconomic groups in this country, who live very often a nightmare of violence, of abuse, of ill health. And the question really is, what are we going to do about it? And a lot of my focus in these 10 minutes will be to talk about children's rights to health as a lever, as the center part of advocacy. Not that those rights are the be-all and end-all, but that rights are a powerful tool that can electrify the struggle for child health, and that we should be using much more effectively than we have done in the past. I spoke at this conference, I think, 5 years ago, and I'm going to say much the same thing. And a lot of what I'm going to say centers around the fact that in our Constitution, children's rights to healthcare are much more strongly stated than everybody else's rights of access to healthcare services. That in particular, children have a right to basic nutrition and to basic healthcare services, which is not limited by language such as the government must do everything within its available resources to progressively realize children's rights. It simply states that children have a right to basic healthcare services. And what I said last time that I was here, and I'll say again, is that I think that we as a community have been remiss because we have not defined basic healthcare services for children. You might know what that means in your own heads, but if you take it out into the country as a whole, we have not done our work to say that that right cannot be fulfilled, that that duty is not being respected or implemented unless 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and whatever it may be. It's for you, I think, to fill what is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on and so on. And this is exactly the approach that we are taking as Section 27 to the right to basic education. Because basic education is also not a right that is qualified. It is a right that is immediately realizable. And activists who are working in basic education today are saying that the state is acting unlawfully for as long as there is not furniture in classrooms, for as long as there is not toilets, for as long as pit toilets continue to present a danger to children. So that's just by way of introduction. But the second point I'd like to make by way of introduction, and I'll probably can most of my slides already, don't worry. The second point is that I think what is different about this 9th Child Health Priorities Conference is that it is taking place at a time of opportunity. That's what I would suggest you have to realize. There is an admission now at the highest level by our president that healthcare in South Africa is in a crisis. Health is under a microscope in a way that it has not been for a number of years. There are fierce debates, as David alluded to, around national health insurance. And even if the national health insurance bill is a very poorly conceived bill, at least it is making us debate what it is that we need to do to fix our healthcare system. There's the health market inquiry into the private healthcare sector, which was discussed, I think, yesterday or the day before here, which again has put a microscope over inequalities between public and private and what we need to do to make public and private work together and to talk to each other. And within this context, we're beginning to see health professionals talk out again, speak up again, raise their voices in perhaps a way that has not been happening for the last decade. But my challenge to you at this conference, and certainly in all of the meetings I have been sitting in over the last 6 months and 12 months, I rarely hear the child health agenda. I rarely hear strong voices who are proponents of child health and the agenda for child health. And to be honest with you, most of you here are health practitioners and health professionals. It's not your job to be the health movement, but there is no shortcut to building a movement for children's health, with health professionals playing a critical part in that movement by supplying that movement with evidence, by supplying it with information and ideas. And there's precedent for that, as Professor Saloojee well knows. Because before we built an AIDS movement, in fact at the very start of the AIDS movement, it started when Haroon and Ashraf Baragwanath and Peter Cooper came to activists and said, this is what is happening to children as a result of mother-to-child transmission. Can we as clinicians team up with you as activists? Can we arm you with the evidence, with the understanding, with the ability to mobilize communities? And the second point that I would make linked to this issue of helping to build voice around child health is that we will not succeed until that voice comes from the communities themselves. It can't be my voice, middle class, 50-something, white, and so on. We have to build that voice amongst affected populations. It has to be poor mums and dads, and aunts and uncles and gogos who are literate in their demands around child health, who are able to speak about the impact of malnutrition on children and to frame it as a right, who are able to speak and make demands in terms of children's rights of access to reproductive healthcare services. So those are my challenges. I didn't mean to spend 5 of my 10 minutes. How many have we got left? 1 minute. I still got more than 10. Oh, that's nice. So I didn't mean to do such a long introduction, but the outline of what I'll say in less than 10 minutes is just a little bit on what is a rights-based approach. Secondly, to ask a question, have rights worked for children in South Africa? Thirdly, to ask, where do children fit in health policy? And finally, I think this is what David and Patricia and other people, we have to be frank about what are the obstacles to a rights-based approach and how are we going to overcome those obstacles. So as I started by saying, children have much stronger rights to health in our constitution than adults. The question is, has it made any difference? And the answer up to now is that it hasn't, strictly speaking, made any difference. But the fact is that Section 28 of the Constitution says every child has a right to basic healthcare services and basic nutrition. We have Section 29 talks about the right to basic education. These rights overlap and reinforce each other. They are immediately realizable, but they will only be realized to the extent that we work together with evidence and argument. For example, to make sure that policy is accompanied by budget. It's also only going to work to the extent that we in this room become rights literate. It was way back, I think, in 2002, that one of the first judgments of the Constitutional Court, which was in relation to housing, it was a case called Grootboom. What Grootboom said is that a policy is not lawful if it doesn't have a budget. So you can't have a policy, very nice. You know, the Department of Health will make you all very happy because now they've listened to you and they've created a policy. But if there's no budget for that policy, there's no prospect of implementation of the policy. So our challenge is, how do we take this strong right
and turn it into something practical? How do we break it down and say, if there's a right to basic healthcare services, basic healthcare services must be composed of something. And what should they be composed of? Now this is just a thumbs up that I produced, but certainly these, I think, are elements of a right to basic healthcare services. As I was reading the latest child gauge, the 2018 child gauge produced by UCT, and reading about the lack of accurate data, the lack of proper surveillance and monitoring, an argument can be made that you can't fulfill children's rights to basic healthcare services if you're not collecting data that tells you accurately about the health status of children. That's an advocacy argument that is based in law and rights and the Constitution. You can't be realizing basic healthcare rights for children if there's not access to safe and affordable transport to healthcare facilities. Again, something which is revealed in the latest report of the UCT Children's Institute. And I agree with David about integrated community case-based management. But the two go together. Access to facilities, community healthcare workers, community-based management. Now just on David's point about community healthcare workers, this issue of community healthcare workers is a policy issue that has been stuck for 15 years. Certainly I remember beginning to work on it on about 2006 or 2005. And yet it is an issue that if community healthcare workers were properly recruited, trained, supervised and incentivized, could have a dramatic impact on child health, not only in rural areas but also in urban and informal areas. There might be other issues which are part of basic healthcare services. Access to information about reproductive healthcare. It's impermissible that our constitutional court, for example, has said that we accept that children under the age of 18 have sex with each other. The Constitutional Court has accepted that, but the government for the last 10 years has been unable to finalize a policy about access to condoms and access to proper education, sexual education in our schools. How can that be the case? And then there are a whole bunch of issues around access to micronutrients and other issues. You know better than I do what should form the components of that agenda. Have rights worked for children? Rights haven't worked for children, but I would argue it's not because they can't work for children. It's because we haven't sought to take advantage of the rights to shift priorities when it comes to child care. We've talked a little bit about the impact of the TAC case. The TAC case wasn't strictly speaking about children's rights, at least the TAC mother-to-child transmission prevention case. But we can see now how that case has impacted on infant mortality rates, under 5 child mortality rates, and how the treatment action campaign has continued since 2002 to try to build a movement about quality healthcare at community level in clinics, etc., etc. And I think one of our challenges as academics and experts and practitioners is how can we help capacitate social movements like the treatment action campaign so that they can actually broaden their agendas beyond what started out quite narrowly as a response to HIV and a response to access to antiretroviral treatment. But have rights worked for children? By and large, insufficiently up to this point. And finally, a couple of points. Where do children fit in the NHI? What are the priorities for child health in the current commitment to fixing the crisis? President Ramaphosa and the Minister of Finance in the medium-term budget speech talked about providing money for 2,200 critical posts. Has your community said, thank you, we will have 200 of these posts? to address critical issues in child healthcare? Have you even asked the question, is there a consideration of child health needs in this debate about human resource shortages and trying to overcome the consequences of human resource shortages? When it comes to the NHI, you have to ask the question, where do children fit in the NHI? I looked up this morning in the latest NHI bill that has just gone to Cabinet. And again, the NHI bill says basic healthcare services. Children have a right to basic healthcare services, but it doesn't define what that right is. So there's a danger that we will perpetuate this paralyzing status quo through NHI unless our voices and our issues are heard. The question that I will put to you for your final sessions this morning is, are there small wins that would make a big difference? Are there critical interventions that would have a ripple effect in improving indicators and outcomes in child health? And finally, just very briefly, the obstacles. Yes, there are obstacles to children's rights to basic healthcare services and basic nutrition. Those obstacles are available resources, they are declining budgets, they're dysfunctional health systems, they're human resource shortages. But as we saw in the presentation that was done, the first presentation this morning, there's answers to many of these issues. The question is, can we put those answers, can we put those solutions on the table? Can you show, for example, in a time of austerity, that when the government says we cannot afford to provide these interventions for children, that there is a greater cost to not providing those interventions for children, because all you do is to shift those costs downstream, and that they are costs that government ultimately cannot avoid paying. So again, how do you marshal the evidence to show that wise budgeting by the finance department, even if it requires significant upfront capital outlay, gives you cost savings and cost benefits, and on top of that, addresses children's constitutional rights of access to healthcare services? Where is the evidence that you can bring forward to support those arguments? And then just in conclusion, to say what my colleagues on the panel have said, activism is a social determinant of child health. Without activism, and activism doesn't just mean toy-toy, activism is evidence gathering, it's evidence mobilization, it's toy-toy, it's litigation, it's going out to communities and empowering communities to understand children's health, so it's not just understood by doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals, but activism definitely determines health. The challenge I've talked about, define basic healthcare services, begin to define what you mean by basic healthcare services. Make the facts about child health known and the costs of not meeting children's rights to basic healthcare services. So I'm sorry if I galloped a little bit, but I had a lot to say in a few minutes. Thank you.
I think we can't let Mark go without at least asking a few questions or comments related to his talk. David?
Yes, just a point of information, Mark, which may or may not be useful. I was involved with a colleague in writing a brief for the class action against the bread companies for price fixing. And we used the argument that micronutrient malnutrition could be adversely affected because bread flour, as you know, is fortified. And actually, the case was won. Unfortunately, they didn't ask for a very big payout, but some of the communities got remunerated. So I think that, I don't know much about it, but there might be a precedent.
Right, well, anyway, I'm going to have a question at Professor Wessels. So one of the challenges from us by Mark is that we haven't really defined the basic healthcare. Unlike education, we haven't done it. But do you agree with that? And I know we've been involved in processes
a way to find it into the system. But if we can, we can, even if we set it at a bar that's a little high, it will be whittled down, but there is an essential core that we can define the children from pre-birth to 18. I believe we must and we can.
Okay, so while we got the mic, Tony, so how far have we been able to push the adoption, the acceptance of this effectively?
There have been some impediments. We try to get involved with through the comic with the people who are advising NHI around the basic package of care, and their approach, the Clinton-based people who were looking at that, was very different from ours, and we didn't think it really fitted, and we actually got lost at that conversation. So we ended up going down our own path, which is to develop a package and try and get us onto the committees that are looking at the basket of care for children. We felt that that may be the way. Subsequently, having put our names forward over a year ago, we've heard nothing. As long as the NHI has gone off in a different direction, I don't feel that I know the way in again, or we know the way in again, around the basket of care. The basket of care is the place, if NHI, even if it's going to take 15 years, is the place to define what the state will pay for children. And we can develop a framework from home to tertiary and from less than 0 to 18 in terms of the structure of the thing. We just need to find that place within NHI where we've actually lost our way because nothing has come back to us. We've taken this to Dr. Heywood was here yesterday and said we think that's the way to go. But there hasn't been a bilateral communication via comic with the advisory to the minister who is responsible for NHI, and somehow we've lost the directions, the connections.
So let me take that to a question for Mark, which is, if the community has defined the basic healthcare package, what lessons have you learned in education about how can we take processes more quickly forward? What are those steps? We haven't had successes.
I think the first thing is that, and it's great to hear that we define the package of basic healthcare services. You then have to take that package out of your small circles of experts and start advocacy so that the communities understand that this is a right. That is what Equal Education, for example, has done around the right to basic education. It's managed to get the government to agree that there should be minimum norms and standards for school infrastructure, for example. It's then had another battle to get that implemented. But you've taken step one, but what are you going to do to take step 2 and step 3? It may be, as David was just hinting now, that at a certain point you need to consider some type of strategic litigation to advance child health. Litigation won't necessarily solve the problem, but often it plays an important role in creating public debate and public awareness about a right or a particular issue. I mean, I didn't mention it in my presentation, but there's also a constitutional right to sufficient food. Now, if you put sufficient food together with the immediate right to basic nutrition, it has to mean something. If mothers and fathers throughout South Africa understood the medical science of the first 1,000 days, which they don't, probably 98%, then you would have a force of people, a movement that would say, well, in the light of our right, we demand that action takes place at this particular point.
Jenny, go ahead.
Mark, thank you very much for a very inspiring talk. There's such a challenge at the moment in the health sector with litigations. And it seems as if we're starting to chase our tails in that the health department is saying, I've got X number of cases, which are X number of millions. And so we need to put that money away. So instead of hiring some healthcare workers, you would actually reduce your litigations. There's this vicious cycle that's going on now. So I've got a district hospital in our district, which at the beginning of the year had 19 doctors. And through a number of mechanisms, that's whittled down. And we've shown during the year that our mortality has decreased. But what you don't show is the number of low which subsequently become litigational. And I'm just wondering, what would your suggestion be in our current situation? How do we tackle this dramatic rise in litigation? But how do we try to motivate to say, if we invested 1 or 2 million, we might save 50 million?
So you're asking very good questions. I wish I was here for longer, but again, I'll throw this back at you. So at the moment, there's about 60 billion rand in medical legal costs within provincial health budgets. I was at a Treasury conference earlier this year in the Eastern Cape. Head of finance said today we paid 150 million rand. It's a vicious circle because the lack of investment in say, obstetric, maternity, child and pediatric care is creating these high perinatal morbidity, mortality, which is feeding the medical legal claims, which is taking the money out of the system, which is reinforcing the shortage. So how do you break that circle? I would suggest 2 things. I don't think it's far-fetched. Say, listen, if you can bail out Eskom or South African Airways, certainly in terms of our constitutional dispensation, take 10 or 20 billion out of this medical legal claim, take it away from the health budget so that it doesn't impact negatively on services, and then have a strategy to prevent, as you have suggested, so that we cut costs going forward. And all of you know very well from the Saving Babies reports that most of these injuries are entirely preventable. But there has to be advocacy and an argument around that. I mean, you get what Gillian showed in her slides in relation to cerebral palsy and lack of access to services to children. And those children, by the way, Gillian, also have rights of access to healthcare services. So it's a big question, but I believe that if we put our minds to it, that there are solutions.
One more question from Laurie, and I'm afraid Mark will have to allow us to be responsible.
I just wanted to take our attention outside the healthcare system and to draw attention to the 2/3 of infants that are living below the upper poverty line. Which is why it's not so surprising that 1/3 of flight infants don't have access to an adequate nutritional diet. And so there's certainly work we need to do within health, but we also, as healthcare professionals and health advocates, need to be addressing social determinants. And our particular concern is that 43% of eligible infants are not actually able to access the CSG. And so we need to be creating systems that enable children to access the CSG at birth in order to close that gap. But also, equally importantly, the value of the CSG currently stands at 410 rand per person per month. And that falls way below the food poverty line, which is 531 rand per person per month. So the other area we need to be advocating for quite strongly as a society, as a child health community, is to increase the value of that knowledge and absolute value of food poverty.
Obviously, I agree. My advice, if I was able to stay in the discussion with you, is that there are multiple problems. There are issues to do with social determinants. They all feed into each other. We're not in a position, and I'm not suggesting we shouldn't deal with the social determinants, to deal with every problem immediately. What are the significant but relatively easy wins that if we were able to mobilize around would raise the morale of healthcare workers, would raise the morale of communities, would give people a sense that they have power and that they can then, okay, we won this, we can now plan more. And certainly that was the experience, has been our experience with TAC. We started off on smaller, narrower issues, but that gave people a sense that we've got power. This constitution can mean something to us. Okay, so we took that step. Now we can look to that. So that would be my suggestion.
part of the discussion, and I think what Mark has raised are three issues which I'm going to start off with the panel. And the three issues, we'll go through them one by one. His argument is that we are practitioners, we have a voice. A lot of our voice is within the health system, and as Tony mentioned, we can develop plans, ideas, but we often get obstructed. That's been what the last 2 days are. A lot of frustration about good ideas that don't bring fruition. Mark's solution is that make the voice of the communities your weapon to get what you want. You often hear that, why can't we have the equivalent of a tech for children? The panel, here's your first challenge. As we all talk about we want to be with the communities, but we don't seem to be able to get the children's voice being expressed by communities. So, firstly, why might that be? But more important is, can we do that? Can we make communities the voice of children? So why haven't we had that success? What's different about the HIV movement that they were able to do this? And is this something that's replicable, or is the nature of children's issues that model of communities being the voice is not plausible or not feasible? Tough question, but I'm hoping you can start off with that question. Patricia, I'm going to ask you to get started with that. That's the mic.
I mean, I think there is abundant evidence of social mobilization together with additional strategic advocacy having critical successes in South Africa. The problem is that if we cost what those advocacy campaigns took, we don't have that kind of advocacy money invested in South Africa anymore. The treatment action campaign and even access, which drove the transport grant escalation, took an enormous amount of money which was available in the country. There was global funding for the HIV and AIDS pandemic on the continent. So the challenge is that these kinds of campaigns need to be professionally orchestrated. I mean, the point that Mark was raising is that you need to bring together sophisticated evidence, information, have an effective communications strategy to enable communities to internalize this information and use it en masse, together with strategic litigation. So the cost factor is the real challenge. So I'm not sure how one overcomes that, because we keep on having little bits. As SACSoWACH, we are asked to be the voices of communities. That's impossible. We're a group of small, like-minded organizations. To have that catalytic mobilization takes dedication, and who takes on that responsibility?
Any of the other panelists want to take on that question?
Well, I do want to echo what you're saying about available funds, and also it takes time to build community agency, and it's not a linear process, and it takes quite a decent budget and a long time frame. So I think that is one of our constraints. As RHP, we are going to try it out in the coming year. Maybe one of our priority areas to build a community agency, and it will be around child health as well. Again, it has been tried before, but we want to not give up on the role of clinical committees and hospital boards and ward counselors, but from the rights-based approach. But yeah, that should be one. That we are a small organization, a small scale, and I was talking about us coming together collectively. There needs to be some coordination amongst ourselves as well. So maybe you're well placed.
Thank you. I feel that we have framed the communities to be powerless. We are not in the communities, we're in the boardrooms. It's not going to happen from the boardrooms. It's only going to happen at the community level. So how many of us have been in the communities recently? We live on a big piece of land where people don't have access to health, where the closest health facilities are 50 kilometers away. We really need to bring ourselves as the healthcare system into the community. We've also made the assumption that communities cannot pay for low-cost access to health. So for as long as they will have to access this free health in distant clinics that are not stocked, where we have serious procurement issues, we will not be able to empower them.
that resources are a problem, but I don't think that's the main problem. So the reason I don't think that the TAC model is replicable is for the following reason. The base of the TAC move was youth who were going to die if they did not get treatment. That was mainly the base. I mean, I know there was a lot of skillful work in which you were involving medical professionals, legal professionals, and so on. But the base was a group who knew they were going to die. Now, unfortunately, children aren't their own spokespeople. It's their parents who speak for them. So then the issue is, okay, is there an issue out of the many we've heard over the last few days that community people feel particularly strongly about? Well, it's clear, one of the things they feel very strongly about is access to health care that's of good quality and where they're treated like human beings. Clearly. It's not child specific. I would say, from the work we're doing in nutrition, that communities feel very strong about what they can afford to eat. And I personally, but obviously I'm biased, I think that could be an area where we could combine a legislative intervention like the right to food, because we have a lot of data showing that many children don't enjoy the right to food. Marije just quoted something about the CHP, we've done work on micronutrients, blah, blah, blah. Right? But there would have to be, as there was in the build-up to action camp, a lot of work with community, answers your point. And that's why I call for the social group. It's not NGOs that are meeting at UNICEF or wherever. It's about engaging with structures on the ground. So who can do that? Actually, the only social movement that can do that is TAC. TAC is the only, it's not as strong as it used to be, but it has got lots and lots of branches on the ground. So then I think the strategy would be, for those of us who are interested in people's health, which is quite tiny, is working with TAC. Is to kind of join forces to decide, okay, what kinds of issues could ignite community action? Because that's fundamentally what we need. And obviously, it needs to be done in consultation with communities, but I think we need to start that process. I think the legislative thing, and Marije can say something about it, we've already started in the Western Cape to explore what could be a legislative focus for children's rights to health. And we're speaking of Anne Skelton, trying to develop that camp. But, as Mark said, getting something passed in law, not the same thing as having as the sad case of teachers.
I'm Hani, I'm from Community Pediatrics. So I've got two questions. The first one is for SACSoWACH. Now we've been talking about empowering communities and engaging people in child health. What I found missing in your presentation was you say that you have a lot of supply side engagement. You're dealing with the Department of Health, intersectoral collaboration, but what I found missing is direct interface with the communities. And as you said, that it's difficult, there are no funds. So advocacy for me is like when a mother goes to a clinic and if the health provider does not weigh the child or is not immunized, she should be able to say that, listen, we did not do this. Or if a newborn dies or there's a stillbirth because of bad strategy out of this conference, and we are discussing this. But if we have to summarize the action point, is in what do we do from tomorrow to create this kind of awareness? Because knowledge has to, because power comes from knowledge.
Okay, so I think we've got the question. It's directed to just what, in fact, any of the other panelists, I think I don't want to get into this is what you really want.
Just second, a quick question, that's for David. So David, you talked about the community health workers and kind of issues you're facing. Most of the evidence for maternal neonatal outcomes, which have improved from Southeast Asia, let's say India or Pakistan or Bangladesh, where community health worker interventions could improve MNH outcomes, was because they had a dedicated cater for MCWH community health workers. They had a dedicated cater for community health workers who were only doing maternal child neonatal health. Let's say Ashas in India or Swasthya Sevikas in Bangladesh, all they were doing was just MCWH. If you look at the South African community health workers, I think they are overburdened with a lot of other things. So, what's your opinion on having a cater dedicated to MCWH?
Okay, so David, that's question. We actually raised that forum, and I think the message we got from Jeanette was we should raise the cater. She didn't say no. She said, yeah, because let's pursue this. Let's hear from David. Just want to take a few more questions.
I have a question around the status of children in our society. And it links up a bit with what David has said, is why was the HIV community able to mobilize people? It's because there was this direct impact. So the question is, do we as a country feel strong enough about how important children are? And so for instance, if we look at the fact that children are, the rights are there in our constitution, that they have access to healthcare, access to food, and that these rights are actually stronger than for adults. Do the majority of adults in our country really agree with that? And I see this, for instance, also with the issue around the consent, that children of age of 12 can give consent for an HIV test. I take a long time convincing health workers that this is actually what the law says, and that it's not something they're embracing. They are pushing away and saying, oh no, but if this was my child, I'm not sure I would want this. And the same is true if I discuss this with mothers. They look at me like, what? Can my child actually consent to this? It's not something they're embracing and that they would run onto the street and go and demand. It's almost like a shoe that's too big that we need to still grow into. And maybe that's one of the root causes of why we can't get advocacy groups, advocacy issues for children really out there is the embracing.
Whoever wants to respond to that question is that we all agree with the right that actually parents agree, our fellow health professionals agree with the right, which is quite an environment where that may not be openly accepted. What then should we do about it? How should we get this? Maybe we'll take one more point. I think Alma, Laurie, and I'm going to allow the panel to be our discussion.
I just want to make a comment that in our early childhood intervention workshop last year, the environmental health officer Haroon showed the pictures where the children are playing. And I want to make the point of advocacy outside the health and form or intersectoral collaboration, because we can have a minimum child health package that's all beautiful. We're sending the children back to that unsafe environments, and we're achieving actually nothing, because tomorrow they're back in the health system.
Okay, so that's the question is, should we be taking up this challenge of defining a basic health package, or many of those others are in the Constitution, or should we be extending our issues to the bigger issues of hunger, poverty, nutrition, or is it all part of this basic package? Want to reflect on that?
Your query around children's rights. And I think what's really important to understand is looking at the rights, particularly of young children, that you are looking at the rights to the family. The rights to healthcare, the rights to food come through the family. So there's actually an alliance between caregivers of young children and themselves. So Where we are looking at intentions around adolescents' rights to sexual and reproductive healthcare and to autonomy. And if you're looking for an ally to take on some of those issues, I would suggest that we start looking to equal education around access to sexual and reproductive healthcare services, because there you have adolescents who are vocal and could be very powerful allies in promoting access to adolescent health services.
Okay, let's get some responses. So you've got the mic, so you can take on whichever question you like.
I respond to the question about what are we doing to get in touch with the community. So recently we launched the Data Care campaign, which is an anti-barrier program, which we are wanting to learn with the Western Cape Department of Health to export the successes into the communities through a mix of technologies such as simple telephonic communications like USSD, health stalls where we discuss these issues specifically in areas that are well trafficked and not necessarily only clinics, but also taxi ranks, health days, and so on. So that is definitely one of the projects, and we're also looking at reviving the idea of health outposts so that we may in fact scale up primary care services to areas where there is no access to primary care facilities.
So accepted in many cases. Well, accepted but it's like the standard of care is not going to get better, and there's none that is latent. The latent, it's not active currently, the activism, it needs to be ignited. And you asked what RHAP has done so far. So our model is a rural advocacy project. We're 6 people, we're very small, we have a partnership model. We've been, in the initial years, we've been focused on the healthcare worker voice and facilitating healthcare workers and RHAP to be collaborating with other civil society groups like the Treatment Action Campaign. So together we've given health rights literacy workshops in rural areas, budget workshops, budget advocacy workshops in rural areas, and I know PHM has done it as well, other organizations have done it as well, but I think it's still a piecemeal approach. Because you give a once-off workshop and then you go on again. It needs to be something more sustained in that community engagement that really plants a seed in communities that they have a right to and a demand for that, right? So I recently saw a video, got the country now, it was in Baragwanath, around health community advocates. Maybe you will know David when I speak about it. A very successful program where community advocates are being appointed within their wards to go not door to door, but to talk to the community about their health rights, and to kind of like a health promotion type of role and be liaison between community and district management, healthcare workers, and in that context it's working actually very successfully, and maybe that is where our investments should be going, a longer sustained kind of program. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Maria. Why don't you just pass it over to Shannon?
So there's just 2 points I want to raise. It's about the issue of how do we mobilize around potential contentious issues. And in my experience with coalition work, you're not going to be able to mobilize around issues where there's divisions. The important point is to find that point of common interest and use that as your entry point, use that as low-hanging fruit to mobilize, as Mark spoke about, to start catalyzing a positive cycle of optimism and hope. And through that process, you start engaging in a rights debate and a rights conversation with communities. And it's a self-perpetuating snowballing effect. Rights-based arguments don't work at a policy level, and they don't always work at a community level, and I think we must be very realistic about that. And I would like to sort of just raise the point that I think NGOs that get together in boardrooms have a very legitimate role to play. Because we all have different capacities to come together, Mark raised this as well, is that it's very unethical to mobilize groups of communities but not give them the tools to fight an equal fight. They're fighting policymakers who have very particular criteria and standards against which they will be convinced. Most of these social mobilization movements end up in litigation because simply a loud voice doesn't work. And we need to capacitate and empower communities to be advocates of the policy arena. But I think the key thing is to find that low-hanging fruit. And I just want to raise the point that Laurie raised. In the ECD policy, there's a very specific point that we can latch onto, and that's getting pre-registration for the CHP during the pregnancy phase. There's a policy commitment to it to resolve that 43% of under ones who don't access the grant they'll get from, but nobody's picking it up. That could be a potential entry point. And then the last point I just wanted to raise, I think a basic package of health services is absolutely essential. My concern is that it immediately just gets distilled down to the lowest common denominator of survival. It's not enough for children just survive. We have to have that conversation around development being an absolute part of that basic package. So, comic structures and such like, all of those reports, I look at them and it's all about survival rates. And that's worrying. How do we shift that discourse?
So I'm going to pick up two of the questions and then I'll respond also to some of my colleagues. So on the issue of community health workers, it is a very difficult issue if you've got, as we do, a complex pattern of the burden of disease, with lots of problems. So there are two possibilities. One is that you have community health workers in specific areas like MCA, or what I would prefer, you have many more communities. Unless you have many more, we're not going to get the coverage. I mean, the data from other countries shows. So, colleagues and I did some work in 6 African countries looking at community-based health care. And we found that in the most successful countries, I'm sorry to hear Tony Costello, there were actually 2 layers of community health workers. So there were the formally employed community health workers, and then there were people who were very part-time volunteers. So when I say very part-time, I'm talking about 1 person or 20 households. That's where you get proper coverage. Because that person is just like a friendly neighbor who knows something and who can refer you up to the community health worker. So how could we get this? People say, no one in South Africa would volunteer. But actually I don't believe that's the case because there are lots of community organizations like Stokvels and so on where people help each other. But we don't explore this in South Africa. We have a very top-down approach to how we explore development. So I think we should really motivate very strongly for more community health workers who can do more. And just finally, so it was mentioned yesterday by Patricia, a few of us did what's called an investment case for community health workers, for Treasury. And I think that may have shifted, I'm not saying it was the only thing, this decision to actually pay. So we show, with a very detailed cost-benefit analysis, that the benefits accruing from community health workers vastly exceed the costs. Vastly. Not just in the savings of averting hospitalization, but most importantly in what's called the multiplier factor in the economy of having unemployed women get a salary, all of which they're going to spend. They're not putting offshore, right? Like the high earners in this country. So we need to push for this. There is lots of evidence. And when the department says there's no money, we have to say that you're actually losing benefits to the economy by not investing. So on the issue of sanitation, I couldn't agree more, and intersectoral work. So could sanitation be that issue? I think that we need to do quite a lot of formative research engagement with communities to find out what would be the issue relevant to child health that would ignite their interest. And I would say it could be nutrition, it could could be sanitation. It could be long waiting times in clinics. That's just what I know. So we need to do that work, and we need to do it through organizations that have got that implementation. So, I'm nothing against NGOs meeting at UNICEF. I sometimes get invited myself, so I'm usually too rude. So, that's not the point. The point is, we have, unfortunately, NGO-ized our civil society. We have, since 1994, hundreds and hundreds of new NGOs and social movements have all but disappeared. I'm saying, unless and until we have those social movements on the ground, the NGOs won't make, because a lot of them are just service delivery. I'm not saying they don't deliver good service. But I'm saying we need advocates. And finally, back in the day, and I think I'm the only person old enough in this room to remember that in the first wave of community health work, community health workers were precisely what Marije was. They were not just service deliverers. They also were advocates on behalf of their communities. And I could cite you numerous examples. And there was a famous paper by David Werner called Community Health Worker, Lackey or Liberator. So now we just talk about the lackey part. They are people to whom tasks should be shifted. It shouldn't be just like that. So we need to try and revitalize this idea of community health workers being advocates. And that, of course, depends on a lot of things, like who selects them and so on. And very finally, what can we do as practitioners? So we don't have to take up all of these things. But in our own work situations, we should be pushing for reformed education, for example. We should be pushing for, we should be advocates for not just taxes and sugary beverages and processed foods, but subsidies for healthy foods, etc., etc. So I'm just saying, we as a community could be advocates in a whole number of areas. I don't think there's just one area. I think there are, if there were more people fighting in the health science institution for changes in curriculum, we might see something. But instead, we have the Health Professions Council reproducing itself and actually blocking progressive change. And we need to call on the Department of Health to actually do something.
I'll say a few words before we end. I think what we've heard today is that individually and together, there have been a number of efforts, particularly focused on children, but in various fields of doing advocacy work in the country. What Mark has raised is that there are critical issues that we can do better at. And I think he raised the issue of defining what we mean by basic health care. That somehow the voice of children, the advocates of children needs to be stronger. That's I think what we're battling with. Is that we individually and do some excellent work. There are 4 representatives of the kind of excellent work. We haven't got that kind of movement. And I think that for me is one of those issues. Can we be stronger? So the NHI is the opportunity, but it's also the danger. We've got both sides. What then does that demand of us as the constituency of healthcare professionals? So again, we depend on individuals. I see Stasha wants to make a point.
Something we haven't really discussed, which I think is really endemic to the health delivery problem in South Africa. What is going on? We have policies, we have budgets, but we have a great deal of corruption that is actually siphoning money out of the system. We have a procurement situation in the public health system that is actually shocking. So those are issues that really we need to discuss, because that is the money that we want to run programs that we don't have. We also have faded the line between public administration and politics, and we see see that all the time, and the delivery of health services should not be politicized, and in fact should be equitable. So those are some topical areas I think we're all shying away from. What are we doing with these health budgets? That's the big question.
I think that can demand us to be better citizens, because that's actually for all of us, not just as health practitioners, but as citizens. And my sense is that that's coming to the fore. More of us, certainly at the bigger level, are beginning to engage with it. I don't think it's become a movement yet, but I think it's coming to the fore. You want to say something again as well?
No, I thought you were a good remark.
No. Okay, I will allow you perhaps after the third class. And the last issue that's going to be the next session that was Mark's advice about. We can think about the big issues and corruption and changing policies, but his comment to us was go for the little things, get the small gains, and every small gain adds it. And I hope the next session is going to take on that theme. You're going to hear lots of smaller gains, not to diminish them, but they're small initiatives. Hopefully many of the smaller ones that get us into the bigger ones, or collectively get us into the bigger ones. All right, the panel is open. I can give you your 30 seconds last minute, so please go ahead and have your 30 seconds last.
I have a question for you, Haroon. You were going to issue a statement after this conference about getting the basics right and showing some of the smaller examples that you say that actually show that it can be done and doesn't have to be highly expensive. Just as in order impetus to this discussion, that you can share it broadly, maybe it can be translated in some other languages as well, and set the tone. Getting the basics right.
Yes, we will have a conference proceeding. We've already got an excellent set of list of recommendations. We're having a session of recommendations. The thing I'm uncertain about is who will hear those recommendations and how far we will take them. But we're certainly going through that process.
I'm just going to repeat what I said earlier on. If there is a statement about getting the basics right, please be careful to be sure to say that children, that's basic human rights, they have a right to survive and to develop to their full potential, and the basics covers that full spectrum. Please.
So in addition to what I said earlier, that we each need to identify one of these areas, that, at least one, that we can work in, and I work in several, but some I only want to work around medical education, or modeling practice, and so on and so forth. Fundamentally, and the only way in which we will control corruption is through increasing participation for office in this country. And we all, that's not just doing your vote before. It is actually, everywhere you go, trying to help people to understand what their rights are, that they have the right to demand. And so we need to really get real and build a social movement that works. Community health committees, etc.
All right, folks, I think that's it for the session. Thank you very much. Let's give a hand for the panelists. It's tea time. I think the good news is we wanted more for tea, so now we don't shortages of it's actually better than biscuits. We've got fancy croissants. Sorry guys, 1 second. We are going to be back at 11 o'clock, please. And if you have